It's a trade-off. And I think the trade-off for cloud, for a lot of companies that I've worked in and I've seen what they do, especially on deployment night, I think there's a lot of benefit there if it's used correctly.
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the MyDevSecOps community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out mydevsecops.io to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company helping companies fix vulnerabilities in open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, president and co-founder of Snyk, talks to Teri Radichel. Teri is the CEO of Second Sight Lab, a cloud security company that offers a 5-day cloud security class penetration test and assessments for organizations worldwide. She is an author of the book Cybersecurity for Executives in the Age of Cloud. She is also an AWS hero, a member of the IANS Faculty and Infograde, received the SANS 2017 Different Maker Award, and holds numerous cloud security certificates, including the GSE, which many regard as one of the most challenging certificates to obtain in cybersecurity.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we're going to dig into cloud security and kind of unravel, what does it really mean with Teri Radichel, who is the CEO of Second Sight Lab, who deal with sort of cloud security really as a consultancy. Teri, thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Teri, before we dig into that sort of cloud security, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it? What does Second Sight Labs do? What do you do? And kind of interestingly, what was your journey into this world of security?
So at Second Sight Lab, we do 3 different things. We do pen tests, cloud security pen tests, and assessments, and also cloud security training. We're all kind of about cloud security and helping people be secure in the cloud. And that also involves, of course, in the cloud, everything is surrounding web application security as well. So that's all part of it. And how I got into security is a very long story, which I have written on my blog if someone wants the full story. But the very short version is I was running a prior company where I did web application development and hosting. And I got kind of frustrated with spam, first of all. And secondly, I had a breach on one of my systems. And there was no one around to help me, and I had to figure out how to fix it myself. I had moved to a managed hosting company from a kind of a co-location facility thinking they would help me. And in the end, I had still to figure everything out myself. And it was just a really eye-opening learning experience and I got a little bit annoyed that my own money got stolen. No one else was affected, just me. And so I kind of became obsessed with security and how did this happen? And I wrote a WAF before WAFs were even a word or a thing. And just trying to figure this all out. Eventually went on to get a bunch of certifications and things. But that breach is what really kind of drove me to want to figure this out a little bit better than I had known before.
That's a fascinating, if painful, way to get into security. Do you see it now as like a little bit of serendipity? Like, at least it got you on a career path that you now enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, it's really actually a career that suits me because I think I have this thing where I don't want people to get hurt. I want to help them with their security. So I want to help, with that. It kind of fits my personality. And I'm also, I can see needles in haystacks. I used to do database development and e-commerce, things like that. And security, you're always looking for that needle in the haystack. You're trying to figure out how that person's going to get in. So it just kind of fits my personality, I guess.
Yeah, well, at least something good came out of it. Hopefully, you've since kind of recovered some of those losses. You do a lot in security. Like both with your business and what your public speaking and the likes. But I know you've recently written a book, called Cybersecurity for Executives in the Age of Cloud. I think you talk about cloud security a lot in different events. What I would love to do, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, is dig a little bit into what is cloud security, and maybe we start it a little bit more indeed at that business level, and maybe take that route down into kind of technology and into the world of developers. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
So let's start at the top. So how do you define cloud security? What does it mean, to do security in this surrounding of the cloud?
So I think understanding cloud security starts with understanding cloud architectures, and there are different things that people label as cloud. Some people say it's just someone else's computer, but I always say it's more than that, because when I was at a managed hosting facility, that was someone else's metal computer, right? A physical server that I was renting. The cloud's a little bit different. It's all virtualized in one way or another, and there are different considerations. You're kind of counting on a third party to handle some of your security. So when we're talking about cloud security, we need to understand what parts we are responsible for as customers of the cloud provider and what parts they are responsible for. Just because they're doing it doesn't mean it's not our problem anymore. We have to understand how to assess cloud providers and ensure they're meeting our security standards, whatever they are. And then we need to understand these new platforms and technologies and how to secure them. And there are many of them, and they're different, depending on what type of cloud you're working in. So it's just a matter of getting in and understanding all those correct configurations. And like I present in the book, the security fundamentals don't change. You still have to worry about things like networking, identity management, and all these things, but we have to look at it in a different way and look at new technologies, new configurations, and figure out how to secure them, sometimes in a different mechanism or manner than we did in the past.
What are some of these sort of key changes then? Like, what are some core principles kind of remain and there's still a concern? What are like 2 or 3 examples where you said, well, you used to think X and now you really should be looking at this and, this Y or X tag?
Yeah. So for example, we saw a rash of S3 bucket breaches. And the issue there is that it's a different type of configuration. It's not something that maybe IT or even security departments were aware of, understanding how to configure that or how to even do it. And then you have developers going out to the cloud who are not as familiar with. The attackers will find anything you put out there. Just because you didn't tell them about it doesn't mean they're going to find it. They're going to be scanning the internet, finding it. So that's an example where we have something new coming out that has a new type of configuration that people need to learn. It doesn't work in like traditional configurations you're used to in your IT department, in your office, or in your data center. That's one example. Another thing that changes in the cloud is, you don't have a single sort of fence around everything. You have this distributed network where you're connecting to all different kinds of systems in the cloud, and you have to understand, I like to say the perimeter is not gone, it's just distributed. So you have to understand what you're allowing to access your data, and hopefully those cloud providers have appropriate controls so you can lock that down. And another thing that is, in a traditional environment, you have people who are managing the network, and they are, as a developer, I never had the capability to put a database directly on the internet. It was just not possible. I did not have the permission. I did not have, any way to do that. And now developers are getting into the cloud, sometimes before the security team, and they have all these responsibilities and capabilities, but they're not aware of, necessarily the risk involved and how to configure those correctly. So we have to bring up the knowledge of the people who are getting these responsibilities if we're going to give them to them, or we have to kind of think about how we're structuring these teams to put people in charge of the network who do understand, those kind of traditional networking ways to manage those networks.
Yeah. And I guess, so all of those are ones that I relate to. There's kind of new technologies and the risks. There's the change in the perimeter and the network. There's the role of developers, or rather maybe the ability to, the independence, of developers with the goodness, but also the risk that entails. How, when you think about, you call it sort of the cybersecurity for executives, or, talking about it, for people at a high level, at what level of the org do things need to change? Like, are these just, because there are a lot of other threats and a lot of other types of considerations that people had to embody that didn't quite bubble up to the exec level before. It was, well, just like secure my systems. At which level of the security organization or of the business, do you need to adapt or change your view of security?
I think there are different issues at all levels. I think in the past, the top executives thought, well, that's the CISO's job or that's the security team's job. And if something goes wrong, it's their fault. But at least in the US, we know that things are changing because these CEOs and executives have to sit in front of Congress and explain why X facts, Marriott, why did you have a breach? What went wrong? So they need to be able to answer these questions. And so this book is to help facilitate them answering the questions. And at the highest level, I feel that there are ways we can leverage, especially cloud platforms, which are all automated, to get better metrics in security. I worked on some very complex financial systems with tax laws in the US and things like that. And I think if an executive can understand these really complex financial systems, they can understand a basic cybersecurity report that tells them, you have so many open ports, you have so many systems that don't have proper NFA and just really basic statistics. And then you move down a layer to the executives and the business owner who are trying to get their initiatives and their projects out the door. And at this level, someone might come and tell them there's a security risk and someone else wants to get the project done and they don't understand it and they say, I don't think it's a risk, and they let it go because they don't really understand how that particular item can be a problem and lead to a data breach. So at that level, I always say anyone who's making a security related decision should understand basic cyber, otherwise they shouldn't be the one making that decision, right? And then you move down to the developer level, and they're the ones hands-on implementing and trying to do the right thing. And they just need more education and visibility into what is the right thing to do, what should they be doing, and also be given tools like Sneak or whatever to try to help them find security problems in their environment. So I think it's just at all levels, there's just different aspects of security where we need more awareness or tooling or metrics, whatever will help.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I guess it goes beyond cloud, and it's just the importance of digital as well, right? Just the sort of the growth of the importance of that tier and the legislation changes that went with that. We ourselves as well kind of go a level lower. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about the good and the bad. So if you think about this transition to cloud, you think about cloud security, what are, the top three concerns that people should have? What are the top three areas that they need to sort of change or pay more attention to, or maybe new threats that they might have? You've already slightly alluded to some before, but what would be your top three priorities?
So I just saw a report, and this was my, I do pen testing, and I always include a web application pen test in that because I say that the web application is the gateway into the cloud environment. I don't find a lot of open S3 buckets on my pen test. They probably know I'm coming, and they're like, oh, check and knock those all down. But I find a lot of web application flaws. And then once you get into that application, you might find a way to go beyond that and pivot and get into other things. And I just saw a report that said most of the companies out there are having web application security breaches. And that's what the problem is in the cloud. I've also seen a lot with identity and credentials, stolen credentials, left out there in GitHub or in some place where it shouldn't be, where an attacker can get access to it, or maybe a phishing attack. I really think those are two of the top areas. Besides just basic misconfigurations, we're still seeing Elasticsearch and Mongo databases, and I just saw another S3 bucket exposed. So these misconfigurations are also big problems. So those will be my top three, making sure those things are locked down. And some of that last part about the misconfiguration, some of it has to do with training, but also people make mistakes. So you have to think about your overall governance within your organization as well, and how you're going to set it up so people can't make those mistakes, right? How you structure your teams and how you sort of manage how things roll out to the cloud. Your deployment system is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're kind of echoing this back a little bit. So you're saying, some aspect of, or maybe your top concerns really revolve around, a lot of it is that change of perimeter that you talked about before, kind of that distributed perimeter that now has, all these different applications that can be vulnerable, and you need to be worried about them alongside, the specific concern around the security credentials. And to tackle it, some aspect of it is people and training those people, and some is the tech. What would be your, how would you approach it? What would be the guidelines on which problems you should tackle with training and which problems you should tackle with a technology?
I like to think about, people having to go to the airport and they have to get their bags scanned and they have to do all this stuff. And it's kind of annoying. You have to sit there and long line and they check all your things. But why do we put up with that? We put up with that because we have seen instances. We understand that we need this for our security and our safety. And so with training, I think we need the guardrails. I think we need the things out there to help prevent the breaches with governance. But I think there's a lot of sort of fighting against this because people don't understand why it's there. And so I think that training and understanding, how attackers can get in and what can happen and everything that can go wrong will help facilitate, people being more willing to use these guardrails. And also it would be great if the security teams and the developers get together and kind of discuss how to make those work, because there's a lot of some assumptions on both sides. Having worked on both sides for many, many years, there's assumptions that security is just trying to stop us, and there's assumptions that developers just, want to make everything insecure, and neither one of those things is true. It's just a lot. It has a lot to do with communication and understanding and training. So I think getting those people together, working together, is very helpful.
Yeah, I love the approach or the perspective here. It's not training for the sake of knowing that you need to put in this or that filter. That's the guardrail. They should be there. You should do input validation, but rather it's almost training for empathy, for an appreciation of the risk, and so that you know that you should care. How do you walk the line between wanting to make people aware of the concern and fear mongering? Like how do you not become, because that's also like sometimes it's like, hey, you're just a doomsayer, you're just talking about all these problems, and they shut out. How do you walk that line?
Some people can say that, but I have kind of pushed back against that. Last year we had the worst year on record for data breaches. This year it's slowed down. I'm not sure how much of that is due to the things going on in the world, but last year definitely was, a bad year. And so people can say that's fear mongering, but it's facts. So, at some point you're just telling people facts. And it's not like you want to try to go in and scare people into doing things, but you also want them to be aware, like, yes, this can happen, this will happen. We don't want to be on the front page of the news. We don't want to have these billions of dollars that we owe due to lawsuits or whatever. So, to people who say it's fear mongering, I guess that's not my audience. I want to help the people who understand that it really is a problem and we need to do something about it. If those people want help, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one, and I must admit that was a bit of an unfair question in the sense that it's two sides of the same coin. I do love one practice that was echoed here on the show from the Segment team, I believe, is that they use in their Know the Attacker training, they use vulnerabilities that have actually been previously disclosed in Segment, so things that have been reported from Bug Bounty, because they found that creates more empathy, that people are more inclined to act on it because it's vulnerabilities and features they know. They can see how that happened, and so it becomes a bit more real for them. So maybe taking the positive stance, still sort of understanding those risks. Do you think the transition to cloud also helps aspects of security? Are there areas, are there sort of top 3 areas where you think security is better off because we've moved to this cloud surrounding?
I'm 100% a fan of cloud security when it's done correctly. I think we're not doing it correctly in so many areas, in so many companies right now. But when I saw cloud, coming from a software background, having to previously manage systems, implement load balancers, build physical systems, which I don't like to do, I immediately saw that this automation could help us, and also the segregation of duties you can implement in the cloud if it's done correctly, which seems to be very lacking, but that can be done in the cloud, and it can be very powerful. You have logs going into cloud systems that people and malware can't change if it's configured correctly, so you have the ability for unlimited logs, and you have the ability to monitor those logs in automated ways and automatically respond to events. You can create governance and guardrails in automation so that, it has to be flexible so developers can get their jobs done, but you can also prevent some of these sort of things that are easy to prevent, like S3 buckets. You can put guardrails in your account that just make that impossible to do. So if people are using the tools the cloud offers, we can definitely improve security. You also have things like the machine learning and AI, which, anyone who says they're doing machine learning on some small data set, that's not working. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a very massive amount of data. These cloud providers have a massive amount of data. So they're looking at this data for their customers, and they're finding flaws, and they're finding, things to alert on. And I think some of the cloud tools, the cloud native security tools, are very powerful for that reason and helping you find threats in your environment. So I think there's a lot of benefit that can come from cloud. At the same time, I understand the people who are concerned because they're losing control of certain things they used to do. I understand that. It's a trade-off. And I think the trade-off for cloud, for a lot of companies that I've worked in and I've seen what they do, especially on deployment night, I think there's a lot of benefit there if it's used correctly.
Yeah. Well, I guess, there's no substantial change, ever comes without pain. There's definitely a period in between, but, there's all that sort of promise at the end of that tunnel. I love the comment on the big data and that amount. We forget how when we moved to web-based emails and Gmails, the dent that has made in terms of spam reduction and such, because suddenly there was a volume of data to learn from and prevent. It's just one of many examples where with this type of large data set kind of helped us prevent or sort of fix a problem.
Definitely.
Oftentimes you see cloud security teams and application security teams. This is in a cloud surrounding, in an organization that is doing development in a cloud surrounding. You see cloud security teams and you see application security teams separate. Do you think that's a natural thing? Is it a temper? Is it a part of that evolution that we're going through, that in the meantime we're putting it in a dedicated team? Or do you think cloud security is indeed quite separate to application security and would remain separate?
I've worked in different companies where we have very limited resources and then a bank with 10,000, 11,000 developers, right? And at a financial institution, they're very concerned, obviously, with security and stolen money and things like that. And so there were many, many different teams. I didn't know how many teams there were. I worked in a line of business building back office systems, and then I moved to the cloud team at Capital One, and I didn't realize there were just so many security teams focused on different things. And I don't know if that will necessarily change, because you have people who specialize in different areas, and you also kind of have this different, the segregation of duties. You have people who are kind of inspecting. They're not necessarily building. I do think your builders and your auditors should be separate, and sometimes the security teams like auditing team. But on another team where I went, another place I went to help them move to the cloud, we only had a team of 30 people. So I made my DevOps team the security team, and I said, I'm going to teach you security now. So it really depends on the environment. But typically at a large company, like at Capital One, when I moved to the security team, I didn't get to change anything with cloud. All my rights were taken away. I was just there to look, observe, audit, help make decisions. And, I wasn't actually doing the implementation anymore. So I think that is, typically a good way to go. You have someone who's watching and someone who's building.
Yeah, you can kind of merge the supervisor and the supervisee, or whatever. I don't know if that's a word. the entity being supervised. Yeah. If you want that to be healthy. On the other side, and if we kind of go to that layer, we talked about like the security teams adapting and developers need that awareness. But what would you say developers? If you're a developer and you've kind of grown up in a pre-cloud era, you've sort of built your software engineering skills in that surrounding, and now you're in cloud. How should you think differently about security now that we move into the cloud? What should you be doing differently?
So at the application layer itself is not too different. You still need to know those OWASP top 10, those top application flaws and things like that. And I know there's different kind of developers. I learned this when I worked for the second company where I helped them move to the cloud. And I thought everyone would want to build infrastructure and do that cool stuff like me. And there are some developers who just want to build their UI and their JavaScript, and they're going to be focused on those web application security flaws. But if you are a developer who's now being asked to build networking or to configure S3 buckets or load balancers or CDNs, you really need to get in there and look at what are the best practices. There's something called the CIS benchmarks out there that will tell you best practices for all three top cloud providers. Get in there and understand those. Another big one is anyone involved in networking really needs, I have a full day of networking in my class, because I think it's really important to understand how all these connections create a risk and how they can help you both protect systems and help you spot security flaws. So I think that's really important if you're on the infrastructure side of things. And then also security best practices like turning on MFA everywhere. So you don't have one of these scenarios where a crypto miner or someone gets in and gets your credentials and starts installing crypto miners in your environment. Set it up so someone can't steal your credentials and do something with them by using MFA. So just really getting in there and learning those security best practices.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair critique to say that it depends on what are you developing, right? And I definitely have been guilty often of sort of saying the word developer, and it means different things to different people, or it's not just one entity. So good to sort of separate that AppSec, that application developer, from somebody who's more of a systems developer or sort of deals with the infrastructure as well. So I think we've kind of gone through this journey, right? We talked about cloud security at the executive level. What do you need to change there? Kind of have gotten down a little bit of the security risks, the security team structure, and some developer activity. Fundamentally, do you think the size of the security teams or the amount of work that remains in the realm of the security team in this cloud surrounding would shrink because, we talked about sort of developer responsibility and needing to take more? Do you expect over time the security team to shrink to have it? Do you think it would grow? There's more to do. How do you see the future of the security responsibility split between the builders and the observers, if you will?
So I think that there is a huge function of security which does not involve hands-on keyboard. It's not about application security and making sure you don't have a cross-site scripting flaw in your code. Security is about risk. It's about risk management. It's about understanding what in your environment could lead to a breach. So there's a whole part of security which is very important and not involving sort of hands-on keyboard implementation. And that's not going to go away. And the other thing that I think will be, separate from the developers or the people building, you have people dedicated to incident response, and they need to be monitoring and watching, doing things like threat hunting. Do you have a web shell in your environment? That's something I teach in my class. Do you have other sorts of, packet manipulation things going on? There are people who understand these things at a very deep level, and they're focused on finding and dealing with these threats, whereas the development teams are focused on building things, and it's a very different mindset. They want to build things and get it out there and make it work. And so you have these two different mindsets doing two completely different things. And the context switching there to try to do both is just not very realistic. If someone's focused on building something, they're not going to be looking at logs at that moment. So you still need those people who are going to look at the logs and be focused on finding those threats in the environment. And what do you do? There's a whole incident response list of things you need to do there to check an event. Is it really an incident? What do you deal with it? Do you need to take it to court, chain of custody for your evidence? There's a whole bunch of things that, probably developers don't even want to think about. So those are still going to be there. I do think that the security teams right now, they always say there's not enough security people. We don't have enough security people to deal with all these things. And one of the things that will help is the automation. So if you have an event that's happening repeatedly, and it's a constant problem, some of those maybe can be automated to the point where you don't have to get in the middle of the night and fix it. And then the security team can focus on more important things like in-depth threat hunting to find things that they don't know existed in their environment. So I don't see the security team going away ever. I think that there are different functions that occur. I think their jobs could get easier if everyone leverages automation, and maybe developers can help with that, right? Because the developers can build some of these things, can help prevent the risks that are out there.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great, everything that we can do in collaboration is a little bit more complicated, but also awesome, when accomplished. So Teri, this has been a fascinating kind of path down the cloud security journey. I'd love, if you don't mind, to sort of finish off with a couple of learnings, or maybe bits of advice from you. The first one is, you've had this journey, this great career going from, I guess, building to getting breached to sort of getting into security and now helping a lot of other companies prevent that from happening to them. What are sort of 2 or 3 key, personal learnings that you've learned through this stretch that you can share to sort of, help the rest of us improve?
I would just say that, you keep learning. You can learn on your own. You don't need to go to a class. I've taken many classes and I have many certifications I had to get as part of a second master's program. But you don't have to go to school. You can learn things on your own. And I've been doing that since I learned a program when I was 12 and out of a book. And it was in the days when people didn't have computers and no one knew what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know people did it for a living. But, you can learn anything. So just keep learning all the time. That has really helped me in my career. Another thing is I don't try to worry about what people say too much. I just go out there and try to keep doing my thing and learning and getting better all the time and helping people and just moving forward. So I guess that's how I approach things. Constantly learning, constantly moving forward, and then trying to share that knowledge with other people.
Yeah, that's excellent. Those are 2 great bits of advice. And I guess I'll finish off with a bit of advice that I ask every guest that comes on the show. If you want to, there's a team that's looking to level up their sort of security competency, right? Their security foo. What's kind of one bit of advice that you'd have to them, to kind of help them achieve that, or maybe a pet peeve of something they should stop doing?
Well, of course you can take my class. I think that security teams and developers have to find a way to work together. I think that's kind of been a theme of this talk, but I come from both sides and I see both sides. And I think raising the awareness and finding a way to understand each other and work together, I think we can do amazing things. As I kind of talked about in my book too, I think there's more we can do with automation and metrics. And that really involves someone who understands security, who understands the threats, but it also involves the developers who can build the systems to help us get those better metrics. So I think really, if we could get people to collaborate on these solutions and understand each other, I think that would really help security.
Excellent. That's great advice. Well, Teri, this has been great, and we'll put a link to the book, on the show notes to ensure people can go check it out, as well as some of the classes that you're offering there. But thanks for coming on here and sharing some of your knowledge and perspective here.
No problem.
And thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope you join us for the next one.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. For additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit mydevsecops.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, you can also find us on Twitter at @mydevsecops. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.